It was a crisp and quiet morning when the discovery happened. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft glow over the fields of the small farm. The air smelled fresh with a slight hint of dew on the grass. It was the kind of morning that felt peaceful, with the world still waking up. The sounds of birds singing and the soft rustling of leaves filled the air as the farmer made his way to the chicken coop. For years, this had been his routine. Every morning, without fail, he would wake up early, feed the chickens, and collect the eggs. It was a life of simple rhythms and quiet satisfaction. He didn't mind the work. In fact, he found comfort in it. He was used to the sound of his boots crunching on the gravel path as he walked to the coop, the same path he'd walked down 1,000 times before. But today, as he opened the door to the hen house, something caught his eye. There, nestled among the usual eggs, was one that looked strange. At first, he thought it might be an illusion, just the morning light playing tricks on his eyes. He stepped closer to take a better look. What he saw made him freeze for a moment. The egg was black. Not the usual white or brown, but deep jet black. He blinked and leaned in, inspecting it more carefully. The shape seemed normal, round and smooth, but the color was completely different. The farmer's heart began to race as he picked it up. It felt just like any other egg, with the same smooth texture and weight. But the color? It was something he had never seen before. He set the black egg gently in his basket, his hands trembling slightly. He couldn't help but wonder if it was some kind of mistake or maybe a sign of something wrong. It was common for chickens to lay eggs in different colors, but never anything like this. There were no known breeds that produced black eggs. It was unheard of, especially in this area. For a moment, the farmer just stood there holding the basket in his hands, staring at the black egg as if it might change before his eyes. He hadn't heard of any reports of chickens suddenly laying black eggs, so he was unsure of what to think. Was it some kind of rare anomaly, or was something else going on? The more he thought about it, the more confused he became. He glanced around the coop, checking for any signs of distress among the hens. But everything seemed normal. The chickens were clucking softly and moving about, pecking at the feed scattered on the ground. There was no sign of illness or anything unusual. He shrugged, trying to dismiss the unease in his chest. Maybe it was just a strange coincidence. After all, nature had its oddities. It was possible that one of his hens had simply laid an unusual egg, but over the next few days, the black eggs kept appearing. It wasn't just one egg anymore, it was several. Every morning as he walked into the coop, he would find another black egg nestled among the regular ones. He couldn't understand it. The hens had been healthy, the farm was in good condition, and nothing had changed. Yet these black eggs kept showing up as if it were the most normal thing in the world. It wasn't long before the farmer began to talk to some of his neighbors about it. They were just as curious and puzzled as he was. None of them had ever seen anything like it either. They had heard of chickens laying eggs in different colors, but this was something completely new. Some of the neighbors thought it might be some sort of prank. Others suggested it could be a mistake or even a sign that something was wrong with the chickens. Soon, word started to spread around the small town. People began to show up at the farm, curious to see the black eggs for themselves. It wasn't long before a crowd of neighbors, curious onlookers, and even some local farmers stood at the edge of the chicken coop, watching the eggs being collected. The farmer was becoming more and more bewildered by the day. The eggs were continuing to appear, each one just as black as the last, and he still had no idea why. One morning, an older man who had lived in the area for decades stopped by. He was known to have a wealth of knowledge about farming, livestock, and everything in between. The farmer greeted him, and after exchanging pleasantries, he hesitantly mentioned the black eggs. The old man raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued, and asked to see them. When the farmer brought him the basket with the black eggs, the old man took a long, careful look at them. He held one up to the light and turned it slowly in his hands, studying its surface with great care. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "Well, I've never seen anything like it," he said in a slow, thoughtful voice. "Not in all my years of farming. But it's not entirely out of the question. Nature has a way of surprising us sometimes. Might be some rare breed, or maybe it's just something the hens are doing on their own." The farmer nodded, but he could tell the old man wasn't entirely convinced. The black eggs weren't something that could be easily explained, and no one could seem to come up with a reasonable answer. The more the farmer thought about it, the more questions piled up in his mind. What was causing this? Was it some kind of new breed of chicken? Or was there something more to it? As the days went on, the black eggs kept coming. The farmer couldn't ignore it any longer. He needed answers, but where could he turn? The local agricultural experts didn't have any answers. The veterinarians were just as stumped as he was. There were no reports of chickens laying black eggs in the area, and there was no sign of any kind of illness or disease among his flock. Everything seemed normal except for these mysterious eggs. One evening, after another long day of collecting eggs, the farmer sat on the porch, staring out at the fields. The black eggs were still on his mind. It seemed like such an odd thing to worry about, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something important was happening. He had worked this farm for many years, and he knew the land and the animals well. But this was something he couldn't understand. As he sat there thinking, a thought crossed his mind. What if these black eggs weren't an accident? What if they were something more? He felt a sense of urgency build inside him. He needed to figure this out, not just for himself, but for everyone who was now talking about it. His farm, once a quiet and unremarkable place, had become the center of attention. And with attention came curiosity. And with curiosity came the need for answers. The farmer knew he couldn't keep waiting for the answer to come to him. He needed to take action, to find out what was really happening. So the next day he decided to take a step he hadn't considered before. He would reach out to experts, people who might have more knowledge about unusual farm occurrences. Maybe there was someone out there who could explain what was going on. And with that, the journey to uncover the truth behind the black eggs began. But what he didn't know was that this small mystery would soon become something much larger. The discovery of these eggs would not only shock him, but everyone who had heard the strange story of the farmer and his black eggs. As the days passed, the farmer's life began to change in ways he never expected. The first few black eggs that appeared seemed like a curious anomaly, something that would be quickly forgotten. But as more eggs kept showing up in the coop, he realized that this strange event wasn't just a passing oddity. Word spread quickly through the town, and soon the small, quiet farm had become the center of attention. Neighbors began stopping by, asking if they could see the eggs for themselves. What started with a few casual visitors grew into a constant stream of people, some just curious, others eager to understand what was happening. The farmer, although grateful for the interest, began to feel a bit overwhelmed. It wasn't every day that his farm became the subject of such intense scrutiny. But the more people showed up, the more his confusion grew. Nobody seemed to have any answers. Even the local experts, those who had been farming for years and knew the ins and outs of the land, were just as baffled as he was. The black eggs didn't seem to be harming the chickens in any way. In fact, the hens seemed perfectly healthy, going about their usual routines of pecking at the ground and clucking softly. The eggs, while unusual, were intact and looked no different from any other egg in terms of texture or shape. The only thing that set them apart was their deep, jet-black shell. Nothing else about them made sense. One afternoon, a local farmer who had known the land for decades came by to take a look. He was an older man, someone who had seen more than his fair share of strange events on farms. He'd been a farmer all his life, and he had a reputation for being able to explain nearly anything related to livestock and crops. The farmer hoped that this old man, with his years of experience, might have an explanation for the strange black eggs. The older farmer examined the eggs carefully, turning them over in his hands and squinting at them in the sunlight. "Well," he said after a long silence, "I've never seen anything like this before, but I've heard stories of strange occurrences like this. Maybe it's just a fluke, or maybe it's something you'll have to figure out on your own." The farmer, though grateful for the visit, was disappointed by the lack of answers. The black eggs had become more than just a curiosity now. They were an enigma, and it was becoming clear that no one in the small town had the solution. As more people heard about the unusual eggs, the farmer's farm started attracting attention from people beyond the town. Local newspapers published short articles about the mystery, and some even sent reporters to investigate. People from other parts of the country started showing interest as well, wanting to know more about the strange phenomenon. The small, quiet farm had become a sort of local landmark, and with it came a flood of questions, speculation, and interest. Some people believed it was just an odd coincidence, while others thought there might be some scientific explanation lurking behind it. The farmer was becoming increasingly frustrated. He didn't want his farm to be the subject of gossip and wild theories. He wanted answers, and he wanted them fast. His daily routine was becoming more difficult to manage. The pressure of dealing with visitors, reporters, and even the curious crowds was starting to wear on him. He had never been one to seek attention or to share the details of his life with others. But now his farm was the topic of conversation everywhere. People were eager to find out why his chickens were laying black eggs, and it was starting to take a toll on him. Despite the frustration, the farmer knew he couldn't ignore the situation. Every morning he went to the henhouse to collect the eggs, always hoping that this time there might be something different. Perhaps the black eggs would stop appearing, and everything would return to normal. But no such luck. Each day as he opened the door to the coop, there they were again, another black egg nestled among the regular ones. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, the farmer sat on his porch, staring out at the land he had worked for so many years. He'd always loved the quiet and solitude of farm life, but now, it felt as though his peaceful existence was slipping away. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep up with the constant attention, the endless questions, and the growing sense of unease that had settled in his heart. The mystery of the black eggs had taken over his life. As he sat there lost in thought, a knock on the door interrupted his quiet moment. When he opened it, he found a man standing there who looked out of place, well-dressed with an air of confidence and curiosity. The man introduced himself as a local biologist who had heard about the black eggs and wanted to learn more. At first, the farmer was hesitant, unsure of what this new visitor could add to the situation. But the biologist explained that he had spent years studying unusual genetic traits in animals and that he might be able to offer some insight into what was happening with the eggs. The farmer invited the man inside and they sat at the kitchen table. The biologist asked the farmer all sorts of questions about the chickens, the eggs, and the conditions of the farm. The farmer did his best to answer, though he didn't know much about genetics or biology. He simply described the eggs, their appearance, and how they had appeared over the past few weeks. The biologist listened carefully, taking notes and nodding thoughtfully. After a long pause, he looked up from his notes and said, "I have a theory, but it's far from a certainty. You see, black eggs aren't common, but they do exist in rare circumstances. It's possible that something in the environment, perhaps the soil or even the feed you're using, has triggered a genetic response in the hens. There are instances in nature where an animal, especially a bird, will produce eggs with unusual colors or characteristics because of a genetic mutation or an environmental factor. It's rare but not impossible." The farmer leaned forward, intrigued. "So you think this could be some kind of genetic mutation?" "It's one possibility," the biologist said, "but we'd need to study the eggs more closely to know for sure. It could be something in the environment, or even a rare breed of chicken that has somehow appeared here. It's a strange situation, but it's not entirely beyond reason." The farmer felt a glimmer of hope. At least this biologist wasn't dismissing the black eggs as a simple oddity. He was taking the situation seriously. And for the first time in weeks, the farmer felt like he wasn't alone in his search for answers. Over the next few days, the biologist conducted tests, taking samples of the soil, the feed, and even the eggs. He examined the eggs under a microscope, trying to find any clues that could explain their color. The farmer, though still anxious, began to feel a sense of relief. At least someone was taking the mystery seriously. During this time, more and more visitors came to the farm, drawn by the news that a biologist was involved. People arrived with their own theories, some claiming the eggs were a sign of something supernatural, others suggesting that the chickens were laying the eggs due to some kind of curse. The farmer tried his best to ignore the bizarre speculations, but it was becoming harder to tune them out. Every time he walked into the coop, he half expected to find something new, something even stranger than the day before. One afternoon, as the farmer was collecting eggs, he found something that made his heart skip a beat. This time there was a strange, faint glow around one of the black eggs. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but there was definitely something different about it. He picked it up carefully and inspected it. It was as if the egg was trying to tell him something. It didn't feel like just a coincidence anymore. There was something more to these black eggs than anyone had realized, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was closer than he thought. Days turned into weeks, and the mystery of the black eggs continued to grow. With each passing day, the farmer found himself in deeper conversation with the biologist who had come to study the strange phenomenon. The biologist, after many tests, was beginning to form a theory. though he was hesitant to make any bold claims just yet. The eggs were undeniably odd, but they were also a rare puzzle that needed more time and study. The farmer, despite the growing pressure, began to feel a sense of urgency. The biologist's words lingered in his mind. It could be something in the environment, a rare breed, or maybe a genetic anomaly. The possibilities were many, but none of them explained what was happening on the farm. There was something in the air now, a kind of tension, as if the land itself was trying to tell them something. What if these eggs were more than just a biological anomaly? What if they were a sign of something deeper, something lost to time? The farmer couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this mystery. Each time he found another black egg, he felt as if he were coming closer to understanding, but at the same time the distance between him and the truth seemed to stretch farther away. He thought about the strange glow he had seen around one of the black eggs. Was it just his imagination? Or was there truly something about these eggs that couldn't be explained by science alone? One afternoon, after the biologist had conducted another round of tests, the two of them sat down together in the farmer's small kitchen, surrounded by cups of coffee and papers covered in notes. The biologist was quiet for a long time, flipping through his notes as the farmer waited impatiently. He could sense that something was about to happen, something that might change everything. Finally, the biologist looked up, his face serious. "I have a theory," he said slowly, "and it's a wild one, but it might just be the answer we've been looking for." The farmer leaned in, eager to hear what the biologist had to say. "What is it?" he asked. The biologist took a deep breath. "I believe these eggs are linked to a breed of chicken that hasn't been seen for over a century. A breed called the midnight fowl. It's an ancient species believed to be extinct. There are no known records of them existing in modern times, but they were once known for laying black eggs. The pigment in their eggshells came from a specific mineral in the soil, something that's long since been lost in most parts of the world. But it's possible that the soil here on your farm contains traces of this mineral. If that's true, then it would explain the black eggs. It could be that your hens unknowingly have a connection to this long-lost breed." The farmer stared at the biologist, trying to process what he had just heard. A breed of chicken that hadn't existed in over 100 years. The idea seemed impossible. And yet there was something about it that felt right. He thought about the land, about how it had always been fertile and rich in minerals. Could it be that something ancient was hidden beneath the surface? Could the midnight fowl truly be connected to his chickens? "How do you know all this?" the farmer finally asked. The biologist smiled slightly, a hint of excitement in his eyes. "I've spent years studying rare and unusual breeds. I came across the midnight fowl in some old records, and the more I looked into it, the more I realized that the conditions here, your soil, your chickens, might just be the right factors for these eggs to appear again. It's a rare occurrence, but it's not impossible." The farmer was quiet for a long time, his mind racing. If the midnight fowl truly existed in his flock, that would mean his farm was part of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. It would mean that his chickens were not just ordinary hens, but descendants of a rare, nearly mythical breed. He looked out the window at the fields, the quiet land that had always been a part of his life. Now it felt different, as if there was something hidden just beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. The idea that the midnight fowl could be part of his farm's history sent a shiver down his spine. Could this be the answer? Could these black eggs be a sign that something ancient had come back to life? The biologist continued to explain his theory. The midnight fowl were known for their resilience. They thrived in harsh conditions and were highly sought after for their unique eggs. But over time, they disappeared. The mineral that caused the black pigment in their eggs became scarce, and the breed gradually faded into legend. But if the right conditions are met, if the soil still contains traces of that mineral, it's possible for the midnight fowl's descendants to reappear. And that's exactly what might be happening here. The farmer listened intently, feeling a mix of awe and disbelief. He had always known that his farm was special in its own way, but this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. Over the next few days, the farmer and the biologist worked together to gather more evidence. The biologist took soil samples from different parts of the farm and sent them off for analysis. He also took genetic samples from the chickens, hoping to find any trace of the midnight fowl's lineage. The farmer watched with growing anticipation, knowing that the answers he had been searching for were just within reach. As the tests came back, the results were startling. The soil on the farm contained traces of the same mineral that had once been abundant in the land where the midnight fowl had lived. The chickens, too, showed genetic markers that were consistent with the rare breed. It was becoming clearer that the black eggs were not a random fluke. They were the result of something ancient, something that had been dormant for centuries and was now making its presence known. The farmer was stunned. He had always thought of his farm as a simple, peaceful place, but now it seemed to be the center of something much larger. It was as if the land itself had been waiting for the right moment to reveal its secrets. The biologist, excited by the findings, couldn't hide his enthusiasm. "This is incredible. You're living on a treasure trove of history. These chickens, these eggs, they're a link to the past, a piece of history that no one knew existed." The farmer sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just been revealed. He had spent his entire life working this land, tending to the animals and growing the crops, but now he was beginning to understand that there was so much more to it than he had ever realized. His farm was a living connection to something ancient, something forgotten, and it was all because of these strange black eggs. Over the next few weeks, as word continued to spread, more and more people came to see the black eggs for themselves. Some were skeptical, others were fascinated, and a few even believed that the eggs had some kind of mystical power. The farmer, however, was focused on the bigger picture. He had discovered something important, something that had the potential to change everything, and he was determined to understand it fully. One day, as the farmer walked through the fields, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. He had always loved the land, always felt connected to it in ways that he couldn't explain, but now that connection felt even deeper. The land wasn't just soil and plants. It was a living history, holding secrets that had been buried for centuries. And the black eggs, they were the key to unlocking those secrets. As the farmer looked out over the fields, he realized that this was just the beginning. There was still much to learn, still much to uncover. The mystery of the black eggs had led him on a journey that he never could have predicted, and he knew that there was more to come. Whatever the future held, he was ready to face it head on. He wasn't just a farmer anymore. He was a keeper of history, a guardian of something much older and more powerful than he had ever imagined. The discovery of the midnight fowl connection sent a wave of excitement through the farmer, but with it came a new kind of challenge. What now? What should he do with the knowledge that his farm was home to a rare and nearly extinct breed of chicken? The idea that he had unwittingly become the guardian of such an ancient lineage left him both amazed and unsure of what his next steps should be. As the weeks passed, the farmer noticed that the black eggs weren't the only unusual thing happening on his farm. The chickens themselves seemed different, more energetic, more alert. Their feathers had a luster to them that he had never seen before. It was as if they, too, were awakening to something that had been dormant for generations. The hens that laid the black eggs were growing stronger, and there was an undeniable shift in the atmosphere of the farm. It wasn't just the land that felt alive with secrets. It was the animals, too. The biologist, who had been spending more time on the farm, began to notice it as well. He made notes about the chickens' behavior, their increased vitality, and the fact that some of them seemed to be growing larger than typical hens. He speculated that the chickens were responding to the minerals in the soil, the same minerals that had been responsible for their rare eggs. Perhaps, he suggested, the chickens were being revived in a way, returning to their natural state after being dormant for so long. The farmer, though thrilled by the idea of his farm being home to such a rare breed, began to feel a sense of pressure. The media attention that had started with the appearance of the black eggs was growing. News outlets from across the country were calling, wanting to do interviews. People from all over wanted to visit and see the farm for themselves. It was becoming a lot to manage. His quiet, peaceful life was no longer his own. At first, he tried to handle the attention as best as he could, allowing visitors to come by and learn about the mysterious eggs and the history behind the midnight fowl. But it didn't take long for him to realize that the farm was becoming more of a spectacle than a sanctuary. It wasn't just the locals and the curious travelers. It was also scientists, historians, and even people from conservation groups who saw the potential for preserving the breed. Everyone had an opinion about what should be done next. The farmer found himself caught in the middle of it all. He loved his farm. He loved the peace it offered, the simplicity of the work and the connection to the earth that he had always cherished. But now it felt as though the whole world was watching, and he didn't know how to handle it. One afternoon, as he sat on his porch, staring out at the land that had always been his, he received another unexpected visitor. It was a man in a suit, carrying a briefcase and looking very official. The man introduced himself as a representative from a large agricultural research institute. He had heard about the farmer's rare chickens and wanted to discuss the possibility of collaborating on a project. The idea, the man explained, was to study the midnight fowl, to learn more about how they could potentially help with agricultural practices or even preservation efforts for endangered species. The farm, he suggested, could become a key site for research. The farmer listened carefully but was wary. He had no interest in turning his farm into a research facility or laboratory. He was just a farmer, after all. His life had always been about growing crops, caring for animals, and maintaining a peaceful existence. He didn't want his chickens to become experiments or the focus of an academic study. But the representative was persistent, offering financial support, access to resources, and the chance to make a real difference in the world of agriculture. The farmer turned down the offer politely but firmly. He had spent years building this farm, and he wasn't about to let it be taken over by outsiders. But the man in the suit wasn't easily discouraged. He promised to stay in touch, just in case the farmer changed his mind. Days later, the farmer found himself alone again, sitting in his kitchen and staring at the papers the biologist had left behind. The reports were full of technical details, genetic markers, soil samples, and potential research avenues. But none of it felt right to him. All he wanted was to take care of his animals and live a simple life. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that he didn't want to turn his farm into something it wasn't meant to be. The decision weighed heavily on him, and as the days stretched on, he found himself questioning everything. Should he open his farm to outside influences? Should he let others study the midnight fowl and use his land for research? Or should he keep the farm to himself, protecting it from the growing number of people who saw it as something to be exploited? Meanwhile, the chickens continued to thrive. The hens that had laid the black eggs seemed to be multiplying, and the eggs themselves were becoming more frequent. The biologist continued his research, and every time he returned to the farm, he marveled at how the chickens were flourishing. He had never seen anything like it. The breed, if indeed these were the descendants of the midnight fowl, was unlike anything that had been recorded in modern times. One morning, as the farmer was going about his usual routine, he heard a commotion coming from the chicken coop. He rushed over, his heart racing, unsure of what was happening. When he arrived, he found one of the hens in distress. It was pacing around nervously, clucking loudly, and seemed to be trying to get away from the others. The farmer knelt down beside her, trying to calm her, but she wouldn't stop moving. Something was wrong. He took her into the small barn and sat with her for a while, watching as she continued to behave erratically. The black eggs, he noticed, were still scattered around the coop, but this particular hen was different. She seemed to be under some kind of stress, and the farmer wasn't sure why. After a while, he began to wonder if something had changed in the environment, something that was causing the chickens to react in this way. The biologist, who had been working on the farm for the past few days, arrived later that afternoon. When he saw the distressed hen, he immediately started making notes and taking measurements. "This isn't normal behavior," he said, looking worried. "It could be a result of the unusual conditions here. The soil, the eggs, the genetics, it might be affecting the chickens in ways we don't fully understand." The farmer listened intently, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He'd spent so many years working with animals, and he knew them well. This wasn't like anything he'd seen before. The strange behavior, the rapid changes in the chickens, the growing number of black eggs, it was all starting to feel like too much. It was as if the farm was changing in ways he couldn't control. That evening, as the sun set behind the hills, the farmer stood outside the barn, looking at the fields. He had spent years working the land, living with the rhythms of nature. But now everything seemed different. The presence of the black eggs, the discovery of the midnight fowl, and the growing attention from outsiders had all combined into a perfect storm of confusion and uncertainty. He knew he had a decision to make. He could embrace the newfound fame of his farm, allowing researchers and visitors to come in and study the midnight fowl, or he could close it all off, protect his peace, and keep the farm to himself. The thought of becoming a part of something much bigger, of being in the spotlight, perhaps even contributing to something important, was tempting. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore the sense of peace he had always cherished. This farm was his life, and he didn't want to lose the connection he had to it. The black eggs, the midnight fowl, the strange behavior of the chickens, it was all leading him to a choice. And as the stars began to twinkle above the fields, the farmer knew that whatever he decided, he had to follow his heart. The future of the farm was in his hands, and he had to make sure that whatever path he chose, it would be the right one for him and for the land he loved. The weeks that followed the discovery of the midnight fowl's connection were filled with quiet reflection. The farmer found himself spending more time in the fields, tending to his crops, listening to the wind, and watching the sunrise. In the midst of the growing pressure and attention, he had decided to step back and think about what truly mattered to him. The farm had always been a place of peace, a sanctuary where he could connect with nature. Now, with the mystery of the black eggs unraveling and the world's eyes turning to his humble land, he wondered if that peace was slipping away. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that he couldn't just let the farm become another spectacle. It had always been about simplicity and self-sufficiency, and he wanted to protect that no matter what. One afternoon, as he sat on his porch watching the sun cast long shadows over the fields, the biologist returned to the farm with some startling news. His research had progressed, and he had found something that confirmed their earlier suspicions. The genetic makeup of the chickens showed a clear connection to the midnight fowl breed. This wasn't just some strange coincidence. The chickens on the farm were, indeed, the descendants of a breed thought to be extinct for over a century. The black eggs they were laying weren't a random fluke. They were part of a much larger, forgotten story. The biologist, looking both excited and cautious, handed the farmer a report with all the details. "I've been researching this breed for years," he said, "and I can tell you now with certainty that these chickens are special. What you have here is one of the last living connections to a part of history that most people thought was lost forever." The farmer took the report, but felt a deep sense of hesitation. He had always known that something was different about his farm, but he hadn't expected it to turn into a scientific breakthrough or a news sensation. He knew the world would want to know everything about the midnight fowl. The idea of his land being the key to preserving such an important part of history was both thrilling and overwhelming. But deep down, he knew that this wasn't the life he wanted. The attention, the pressure, it was too much. The farm, his home, needed to remain a place of peace. After a long pause, he looked up from the report and spoke slowly. "I appreciate everything you've done. I really do. But I think it's time for me to make a decision about what happens next. I can't let this farm turn into something it's not. I don't want the chickens or the eggs to become just another experiment for the world to observe." The biologist, sensing the farmer's resolve, nodded. "I understand. This is your land, and you're right to want to protect it. But think about it. This could be an opportunity for people to learn to preserve something important. You don't have to share everything, but this is bigger than just the farm now. People are already starting to take notice, and I think there's potential for good to come from this." The farmer didn't reply immediately. He thought about the biologist's words. What would happen if he did open his doors to research? If he let scientists study the chickens and the eggs? The idea of sharing his farm with strangers, of becoming a part of something much larger than himself, was tempting. But he couldn't shake the feeling that it would mean losing the quiet life he had built. Later that evening, after the biologist had left, the farmer walked through the fields again, his boots crunching on the dry earth. The moon was rising, casting a silver glow over the landscape, and for a moment, everything seemed still. It felt as though the land itself was waiting for him to make up his mind. He thought about his father and his grandfather, about the generations of farmers who had come before him. They hadn't worried about fame or attention. They had just worked the land, taken care of the animals, and found contentment in the simplicity of their lives. That was what he had always wanted, to be a part of that tradition, to keep the farm a quiet, sacred place. The next day, the farmer made a decision. He called the biologist and explained that he had chosen to keep the farm to himself. He wasn't going to open it up for research or public visits. He wanted to maintain the privacy and peace that had always been the foundation of his life. He knew it was a tough decision, especially since the midnight fowl could be so important to the world of agriculture, but he couldn't bring himself to share it. The biologist was disappointed but understood. You have every right to keep the farm your own. I can't blame you for that, but I hope you'll reconsider one day. This is a rare opportunity. You've discovered something that could change the way we think about conservation and genetic preservation. The farmer appreciated the biologist's understanding, but his mind was made up. He spent the next few days preparing his farm for the quiet life he had always wanted. The attention from the outside world was fading, and he was grateful for the peace that was returning to the land. The black eggs continued to appear, though not as frequently as they once had. The hens that laid them seemed to be growing older, and the farmer wondered if the midnight fowl bloodline was slowly fading once again. Still, he cherished each black egg, knowing that they were a symbol of something ancient and beautiful, something that had lived on in secret for so many years. He started a small project to preserve the breed privately. He didn't want the midnight fowl to disappear again, but he also didn't want them to become a commodity. He carefully selected the best eggs and incubated them in a quiet corner of the barn, away from prying eyes. Over time, he managed to raise a small flock of the special chickens, making sure they remained as they had always been, part of the land, part of the family. As the seasons changed, the farm returned to its familiar rhythm. The crops grew tall in the fields and the animals were well cared for. The farmer spent his days tending to his chores, and in the evenings, he would sit on the porch watching the sunset, content in the knowledge that he had chosen the path that felt right for him. One autumn evening, as the harvest moon rose high in the sky, the farmer stood by the barn looking out over the land. The fields were golden with ripened crops, and the air was crisp with the promise of the coming winter. He felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that he had protected what mattered most to him: his farm, his life, and the legacy of the midnight fowl. In the distance, the faint outline of the chickens could be seen, moving quietly in the dusk. The black eggs, rare and beautiful, were still being laid, but now they felt like a secret, a hidden treasure that only the land and the farmer truly understood. He didn't need the world to know what he had discovered. He didn't need fame or recognition. The farm was his world, and that was enough. The farmer had learned something important through this journey. Sometimes the most precious things are the ones that remain quietly hidden, waiting to be discovered only by those who truly care. The black eggs, the midnight fowl, they were part of a story that would never be told in headlines or textbooks. They were part of the farmer's story, and that was more than enough. As the night fell, the stars shining bright above, the farmer smiled to himself. He had made his peace with the land, with the chickens, and with the mystery of the black eggs. And that, he knew, was the greatest discovery of all.